Some runways give pilots no second chance. Land short and you hit the cliff. Land long and you run out of world. Yet these airports stay open, and planes still line up for them every day. The real question is why these runways exist at all, and what forces keep them alive despite the danger they carry. Aviation is built on space. Pilots expect long approaches, wide safety zones, and room to correct a mistake. Most airports offer generous margins because margins save lives. But not every community lives on flat land. Some live on sharp mountains, small islands, or valleys carved long before modern flight. These regions cannot shift the terrain to fit aviation. Instead, aviation bends itself around the terrain. It flies into places where runways barely fit between hills or cling to cliffs that drop into clouds. These runways break the rules of design because the world around them leaves no other choice. The first place where terrain and need collide is Lukla Airport in Nepal. Many pilots call it the most dangerous runway on Earth. It sits at 9,000 feet, where the air is thin and engines breathe less power. The runway is short and slopes upward toward a rock wall. The other end drops into a deep valley that swallows sound. There is no go around. Pilots commit long before they know if the landing will work. Clouds slide across the valley like slow-moving curtains. They can close in within seconds and leave a pilot blind with no escape path. Winds swirl between the mountains and change direction without warning. Yet Lukla stays open because it is the only fast link to the Everest region. Villages depend on it for food and fuel. Helicopters cannot carry the same weight. Roads do not reach these heights. Lukla is dangerous because the mountain leaves no safer place to land. Pilots who fly here learn every ridge, every gust pattern, and every shadow on the slopes. The danger is part of the airport. You cannot remove it, you can only prepare for it. Courchevel in France offers a different kind of threat. The runway looks like a ski slope cut into the side of a mountain. It rises sharply, forcing aircraft to land hard and fast. If the pilot floats even a few meters, the aircraft will not stop in time. Winter brings snow that steals grip from the wheels and ice that hides under the surface. The approach winds through the Alps in narrow paths. Pilots must follow curved lines between ridges and drop onto the slope without hesitation. There is no chance for a go-around. Once the aircraft touches the incline, the landing is final. Courchevel remains open because the ski region it serves has no space for a safer airport. Roads twist through the mountains and close during storms. Workers and families depend on this strip of pavement, no matter how difficult it is to reach. Far from the snow and stone of the Alps sits Princess Juliana Airport in St. Maarten. Tourists gather on the beach below the approach path and film aircraft flying only a few meters overhead. It looks exciting from the sand, but it feels very different from the cockpit. The runway is short and surrounded by water. Strong winds rush across the island and hit the aircraft from the side. Gusts can push the aircraft off the centerline only seconds before touchdown. Pilots cannot float or drift. They must hit the exact spot marked for landing. If they flare too high, the runway becomes too short to stop. If they correct too late, the wheels may strike the edge. Yet this airport remains the lifeline of the island. Tourism depends on every arrival. Supplies enter through this single runway. Expanding the airport would require land that does not exist. The island is small and the sea is close, so pilots train for the winds and bring the aircraft in with precision that leaves no room for delay. Paro Airport in Bhutan is one of the few runways on Earth that only a small group of pilots is cleared to use. The airport sits inside a deep valley surrounded by mountains that rise thousands of feet. There are no instrument landing systems to guide the final approach. Everything is flown by eye. Pilots follow the shape of the land, turning close to the hills and descending at angles that leave no margin. One wrong turn leads directly into rock. One wrong speed creates a stall in a place where recovery is impossible. The runway is safe once the aircraft reaches it. The challenge is reaching it at all. Bhutan relies on this airport because the surrounding terrain leaves no other open path for flight. The same mountains that protect the kingdom also dictate how aircraft must approach it. Toncontin Airport in Honduras brings another kind of difficulty. For decades, its approach required pilots to dive steeply and turn sharply between hills. The runway sat in a bowl of terrain that offered almost no escape options. Even after upgrades and changes in operations, the geography continues to trap winds and limit approach paths. The capital city of Tegucigalpa cannot flatten the mountains around it, so the airport remains where it has always been, shaped by land that refuses to move. Madeira Airport in Portugal is a mix of human ingenuity and nature's force. For years, the runway was too short for modern aircraft. After a crash, engineers extended it by building a long platform over the ocean, supported by massive columns that rise from the water. The runway grew, but the winds stayed wild. Atlantic gusts wrap around the mountains and hit the aircraft as they descend. The crosswinds can shift completely within seconds. Pilots train specifically for Madeira and learn when to continue and when to climb away. The airport stays open because the island has no other flat space to build on. Every flight brings cargo, medicine, families, and tourists who rely on that strip of elevated concrete. On the island of Sabah, the Wancho e Irausquin Airport has a runway so short that only small aircraft can use it. It sits on a plateau with cliffs on both sides. The sea waits below. Pilots must touch down at the exact point marked for landing. A few meters early or late can turn the attempt into a disaster. The island itself is made of sharp ridges and steep slopes. There is simply no other place to land. The runway is not dangerous because of poor design. It is dangerous because nature gave the island nothing else. These runways have one thing in common. Their danger is obvious. It is written in the terrain. It is visible from the cockpit windows. It does not hide in paperwork or software. It sits in the mountains, the cliffs, the crosswinds, and the narrow valleys. Pilots know it. Residents know it. Yet these runways stay alive because shutting them would isolate entire communities from the rest of the world. Some of the world's deadliest runways are still active today, but others pushed aviation so far that the only answer was to replace them. Their stories show how danger can live in full view for years until one moment forces the system to change. Kai Tak Airport in Hong Kong was one of the clearest examples. Pilots knew its risks. Airlines trained for its approach. Passengers felt their hearts jump as the aircraft dropped low over rooftops and banked toward the runway at the final second. To land at Kai Tak, pilots aimed at a large checkerboard painted on a hillside, then made a tight right turn to line up with the strip. The city rose around them. The harbor waited just beyond the pavement. Crosswinds from the mountains pushed aircraft sideways in the last seconds of flight. Every arrival felt like a test. Yet the airport stayed open for decades because Hong Kong had no other space to build. The city grew around the runway, not the other way around. Only when a new airport was built on reclaimed land did Kai Tak finally close. The last departure ended one of the most dramatic approach paths in aviation. Gibraltar Airport carries a different kind of tension. The runway crosses a main road. When an aircraft approaches, traffic lights stop cars and buses. To one side is the sea, to the other is the huge rock of Gibraltar. Winds sweep down its face and twist across the runway. A calm approach can turn unstable in seconds. Pilots must manage sudden drops in lift and quick shifts in direction. Travelers on the ground see it clearly. They watch the aircraft approach as the road closes beneath it. The airport continues to operate because the territory has almost no flat land. It is a compromise between geography and need, and everyone who flies there accepts the thin margin. On the small island of St. Barthélemy, the runway begins on a hill and ends near a beach. Aircraft approach from the higher side, drop quickly over a roundabout, and land on a short strip that slopes toward the sea. Tourists watch from only a few meters away. To a pilot, the danger is clear. The approach is steep. The runway length is limited. Winds often swirl over the ridge. A small misjudgment becomes large in seconds. Yet the airport stays open because the island has no space for a safer runway. It keeps the community connected and allows families, supplies, and visitors to reach a place that would otherwise be isolated. Further north, Barra Airport in Scotland is one of the rare places where scheduled flights land on a beach. The runway is the sand itself. Tide charts dictate the schedule. Pilots descend toward the shoreline and judge their landing on a surface that changes every day. Wet sand slows the aircraft differently than dry sand. Storms push waves close to the touchdown zone. When the tide rises too high, the runway disappears underwater. It is a place where nature decides the limits. The airport remains in use because the islands rely on it for medicine, food, and connection to the mainland. Ferries cannot operate in every weather. Air travel fills the gaps that the sea cannot. Some runways became dangerous as aircraft grew larger and heavier. Tribhuvan Airport in Kathmandu sits in a valley surrounded by steep terrain. Winds shift quickly, clouds form fast. Go-arounds are limited because mountains rise close to the flight path. As aviation expanded and wide-body aircraft entered service, pilots voiced concerns about the difficulty of stabilizing approaches. Over the years, incidents added reminders that the terrain never changes. The airport stayed open because Nepal relies on it for international travel. The mountains cannot be moved. Aviation had to add layers of protection around a runway that still carries the limits of its geography. Tenzing Hillary Airport in the town of Manang sits between ridges that channel the wind through narrow passes. The valley can go from clear skies to fog in minutes. The runway is gravel and short. Flights operate only in daylight, and only when the weather is calm enough for the pilot to see the surrounding slopes. Even then, the terrain leaves little room for correction. The airport remains open because hiking trails, medical supplies, and local families depend on it. Without air access, the region would be cut off for long periods each year. These runways reveal the true shape of aviation. The danger is not hidden in late-night memos or missed inspections. It lives in mountains, cliffs, wind funnels, and short strips of land that existed long before aircraft ever touched them. Pilots see the risk every time they line up to land. Ground crews know it, residents know it. Yet these runways continue because shutting them would disconnect the places that need aviation most. Even with modern aircraft, advanced navigation tools, and stricter procedures, the margin stays thin. Weather can erase visibility with little warning. Winds can shift in ways that only local crews understand. Rain can turn a familiar landing into something entirely different. Training becomes the main safety system. Pilots who fly to these airports study more than procedures. They study landscapes. They memorize how the air behaves at certain hours. They learn which ridges send downdrafts and which valleys stay calm. They practice decision-making in seconds because seconds are all the terrain allows. Regulators help by adding lighting systems, improving surface markings, setting tighter weather limits, and studying every small incident to find lessons. Engineers build longer platforms, reinforce slopes, and design safer drainage. But the terrain remains. The geography does not bend. The runway stays where the land will allow it and nowhere else. That is why these runways still operate. People live in places that are difficult to reach. They build homes on cliffs, islands, and in valleys because that is where life grew around them. They depend on air travel to keep their world connected. For many of these communities, the runway is not just a patch of pavement. It is their link to medicine, food, education, and work. Closing it would take more from them than the risk ever could. These runways also remind aviation of something deeper. Even in a world of software, automation, and modern design, there are places where safety still depends on human judgment. Pilots rely on their training, their understanding of the land, and their ability to stay calm when the wind shifts or a cloud drifts across the valley. The mountains offer no second chances. The cliffs offer no correction. The island shorelines offer no extra length. The skill of the crew becomes the final barrier between routine and disaster. Deadly runways are not accidents. They are the product of geography, history, and human need. They remain open because shutting them would silence entire regions. Their danger is written into the earth itself, and understanding these places shows how far aviation must go to keep communities connected across the hardest landscapes on the planet. If this changed how you see flying, subscribe for more sky-level insights.